Hello, thank you for listening in, and thank you to the Donkey Breed Society Eastern region for inviting me to talk about vaccination. I actually feel really privileged to speak to you today because you're all experts in the subject of vaccination already, thanks to the events of the past year. So my job is just to tailor your expertise so that it perfectly fits your donkeys. Let's start by having a quick look at coronavirus. I don't think anything on this list will be new to you. And now let's look at the equine flu virus. Same list of issues. The viruses even look similar. They're both respiratory viruses after all. In the next 20 minutes, we'll go through some of these aspects of viruses and then move on to talking about tetanus and end up with a few other diseases for which vaccination is available, and exciting news about a new vaccine for a disease we all know and hate. And all these diseases affect horses, mules, and zebras too. The flu virus, it's really catching. Donkeys don't have to touch each other or even be close to catch and spread the virus. It can be carried up to 5 kilometers on the wind, and it can survive for at least 2 days off the animal. You could bring it home on your clothing if you visited other equids or been to an agricultural merchant or a show, for instance. And a passing horse could spread it to your donkeys, even if they're confined to their paddocks. Just like coronavirus in humans, many equids may be symptomless carriers. And let's not beat about this bush, it kills donkeys, much more so than horses. Just one recent example, 46 wild donkeys reported dead because of the flu virus, and a further 50 showing typical distressing signs in an area of California just a couple of months ago. Very sad, but also a crucial clue here as to the reason for the high mortality. These were wild donkeys, and wild donkeys are not vaccinated. Now, if you've ever had flu, you'll probably have a story to tell about how awful you felt, feverish, weak, off your food. There's no reason to think that horses and donkeys feel any different when they have flu. Early signs are a fever and sometimes a cough. Initially, a thin, watery nasal discharge may be evident, but this usually progresses to a thick discharge as bacteria invade the lining of the respiratory system, which has been ravaged by the flu virus. The donkey may well go off his food, which is, as you know, a very dangerous situation. If donkeys don't eat for more than a few hours, they're likely to develop hyperlipemia, which is almost invariably fatal, if not treated earlier and aggressively. It's worth remembering that quite often the main presenting sign of any illness in donkeys is their dull behavior. The positive thing is that influenza is pretty much completely preventable by vaccination. Now, we've heard the expression herd immunity so often over the past year. Well, it's exactly the same in our equine population. It's believed that only about 30% of British equids are vaccinated against flu. This is nowhere near herd immunity level, which requires at least 70% of the population to be vaccinated. If about 70% of our equids were vaccinated, then the chances of your donkeys meeting an unvaccinated animal would be very low. We can all protect our donkeys just for the sake of our donkeys, but also to play our part in achieving herd immunity. And believe me, vaccinations are a hell of a lot cheaper than treatment of flu, which could amount to several £100s with no guarantee of success. And just something to ponder, if we accept that a donkey suffers if it gets flu, and that suffering is unnecessary because vaccination would have protected him, are we breaking the law which states that unnecessary suffering and not protecting from disease are offences? Are we all experts on variants? Yes, we are. Coronaviruses are notorious for mutating very quickly, which is going to make vaccine production a very dynamic affair, and we may always be one step behind. Thankfully, the flu virus doesn't mutate so quickly, but mutate it does, and there have been many strains identified over the years and vaccines produced accordingly. It's really important that we know what current strains are circulating and that the vaccines we use are effective against those strains. The World Organization for Animal Health, also called the OIE, is the animal equivalent of the World Health Organization. And one of its remits is to collect data on viral mutations and variants and advise on which vaccines in current production should be used, depending on which country the animal lives. In the UK and Europe, the currently circulating variants, which are also called clades in the equine world, are called Ohio and Richmond. Now, I'm not here to recommend you a particular brand of vaccine, but you can see for yourselves which one of the 3 brands available in the UK protects against Ohio and Richmond. Armed with this knowledge, you're in a better position to discuss vaccination with your vet. As far as coronavirus vaccines are concerned, we're being told that they will still afford some protection from new variants, but it is reduced protection, and the same principle applies to equine flu vaccines. Some protection will be offered by all the brands, but one clearly stands out as being variant specific. I have included a link on this slide so you can read the OIE report for yourself if you're interested in learning more. And feel free to screenshot that website if you want. One thing about flu vaccines is very different to corona vaccines, and that's that they have been around for around 50 years. So there's a huge amount of data as to their efficacy and the duration of immunity. As you know, we're still not sure how long coronavirus vaccination will offer protection for. A huge amount of work and money goes into getting the vaccines licensed, and this includes knowing how long they provide protection for. In the case of equids, around 12 months. Protection levels rise steeply after the injection and remain high for several months before starting to wane from about 10 months and then reach the lower limit of effectiveness at around 12 months, hence the need for an annual booster. In high-risk situations, boosters can be given more often to maintain peak levels of protection, but for the great majority of donkeys, once a year is absolutely fine. Now, if you're given a coronavirus, you're warned that you may feel a bit under par for a couple of days. The same is true of equids having their vaccinations. It's a natural process whereby the body is starting to mount an immune response. Your donkey won't get flu because of the injection doesn't contain the live flu virus. Vaccines do contain ingredients called adjuvants, which are simply there to enhance the immune response that your donkey will generate. In Protect, for example, the vaccine contains a tiny bit of flu virus DNA inserted into, would you believe, a canary pox virus, and a polymer called carbomer as the adjuvant. There's nothing there that will give your donkey flu. So don't be too alarmed if your donkey is not 100% for a day or so after vaccination, but it's good to keep a diary note of any reaction that the donkey presents so you can watch out for it next time and discuss with your vet. Now, let's talk briefly about tetanus, otherwise known as lockjaw, a very different type of disease. It's bacterial rather than viral, and not catching in terms of donkey to donkey spread, but nonetheless a killer disease. It's caused by toxins produced by clostridial bacteria if they get into a wound. Now, these bacteria are everywhere, in the soil, in dust, in buildings, and they're found all over the world. Just a tiny wound from, say, a blackthorn, a sharp piece of wire, a foot abscess, or even minor gum injuries that can occur when your donkey is having dental work done could be the site where the bacteria can invade the body. You have absolutely no control over this bacteria. The medical advice for us humans is to wash a dirty wound immediately and thoroughly with soap and water, and of course most humans are vaccinated. Now, we all know that donkeys are incredibly intelligent, but I haven't seen one rush for the soap and water whenever they get a scratch. The term lockjaw arises from the fact that the toxins affect the nervous system, causing the muscles to go into spasm. The jaw is clamped tight, the legs become stiff, and eventually the donkey will die slowly and badly because the breathing muscles are paralyzed. In the early stages, aggressive antitoxin and antibiotic therapy can be tried, along with sedatives, to attempt to relax what's a very distressed animal. Treatment will be very expensive and not often successful. This horrid disease is preventable. The tetanus vaccine is highly effective at protecting equids and only needs to be given every 2 years. So it fits perfectly with a flu vaccination program. 1 year the donkey will have a combined flu and tetanus injection, the following year just flu. I've witnessed donkeys with tetanus when working abroad, and it's probably the most distressing disease I've ever seen. So please don't let it be your donkey. Is there a reason why you shouldn't vaccinate your donkeys? Vaccination is not cheap, but it is money well spent, I promise you. Costs vary depending on what part of the country you live in, but feel free to haggle with a vet practice. For example, if you have 2 donkeys, expect to pay for 2 vaccines, but just make sure you're only paying 1 visit fee. And does your practice do zone days, where they offer cheaper visits on a certain day of the week when they're working in your area? When things get back to normal, is it possible to combine a vet visit with a local donkey get-together? Our equivalent of a mass vaccination centre, if you like. It may be that a local group of you all use the same vet practice. The bottom line is vaccination should not be seen as an optional extra. It's one of the prices we have to pay for the privilege of keeping donkeys. Most people wouldn't buy a car and then say they can't afford to insure it. Does your donkey still need vaccinating when he's old? After all, he's had loads of vaccines over the years. Well, yes, he does. Look at coronavirus and the groups of people deemed most at risk. It's not the young or the middle-aged, it's the elderly. As all animals age, their immune system becomes less efficient, less protective, so boosting the immune system becomes even more important with advancing years. One of the commonest geriatric conditions of equids is Cushing's disease, and this significantly impairs the immune system. You never take your donkeys anywhere, so they're not at risk. Well, firstly, why not? Why don't you take them out? Donkeys absolutely relish a bit of excitement, and there's nothing nicer than taking donkeys for a walk. And secondly, I've already mentioned that like coronavirus, the flu virus can spread easily. Remember, it can blow 5 kilometers on the wind and can live for 2 days outside the body. So it could be on the surfaces you touch, your clothes, or stuff you buy from the feed or tack shop. Are there alternatives? Again, I'm going to hark back to coronavirus here. We're constantly being told that the government is following the science, and that is the right thing to do. We vets follow the science too, and the science tells us that vaccines work. There is no published, peer-reviewed scientific evidence that says alternatives such as homeopathy are effective in protecting against flu or tetanus. If your donkeys are nervous about the vet or the farrier, then do a bit of behavioural work with them. And try and relax yourself. The donkey will always pick up on your emotions. It's worth just putting the head collar on every few days and then giving them a lovely wither scratch before taking it off, or walk them to some browse that they'll enjoy. That way they come to associate the head collar with something nice. And it's really good to get your donkeys used to strangers, if you can, so the vet visit will become something that holds no fear. And firmly stroke or scratch their neck, which is where the injection goes, to get them used to having a bit of pressure on that area. It's a tiny injection using a very fine needle, so virtually painless and very quick. And do remember just to have the donkey's passports handy so the vet can record the vaccinations. I'm going to finish by just mentioning a few other diseases that are endemic in the UK. That is, they're present, albeit usually at low levels, and that can be vaccinated against. West Nile fever, that you'll see at the bottom, is not yet endemic, but it's an exotic disease that the government is quite concerned about because it affects humans. None of these diseases is currently being advocated as part of a routine vaccination program for companion donkeys, so this is really just for your interest. Rotavirus can cause foals to be really poorly because it attacks the digestive system, so they can't absorb nutrients. Mares at stud may be vaccinated so that protection is passed to the foal. Equine viral arteritis causes respiratory disease and may make mares abort. Stallions can be lifelong carriers. And this disease is notifiable, so it has to be reported to DEFRA by your vet. Equine herpes virus has several strains, causing anything from very mild respiratory disease to a rare but usually fatal neurological syndrome. In fact, there's an outbreak of the neurological form right now in Spain, and it's proved fatal for several high-end sport horses. It's an interesting virus because once infected, a donkey will remain a carrier for life. It's the same type of virus that causes cold sores in humans, and anyone that's affected will know a cold sore can happen just when you least expect it. And it's a result of reactivation of the virus in your body. Cold sores are for life, I'm afraid. For the vast majority of donkeys, herpes virus is something they will live with quite happily, and you'll probably never know that they harbour the virus. Now, strangles is a nasty bacterial disease causing respiratory problems and big abscesses in the throat glands. Vaccination is only recommended for at-risk animals, those which mix with a changing population of equids. There is probably no reason to consider this one for companion donkeys. As I mentioned before, West Nile fever is something we now need to be very aware of. It used to be something we didn't have to worry about at all, but it's primarily spread by mosquitoes, and it can affect birds, equids, and people. The mosquitoes are those that live in hot countries, but are now found in parts of the UK, hence the current concern. So vets are being asked to keep a lookout for this as an emerging exotic disease. Other countries will have different endemic diseases. For example, where I work in Israel and Palestine, well looked after equids are routinely vaccinated against tetanus, rabies, and West Nile fever. And I'm so excited about this. Just so you know, there is now a vaccine licensed for use to protect against ringworm, but has found to be effective in some cases against sweet itch. This is pretty hot off the press, but it's very good news and something to ask your vet about if you have donkeys with sweet itch. I'm going to talk some more about that in the talk about skin diseases coming up in the next couple of weeks. I thought we should get a donkey's point of view on vaccination, so I asked Kay. Rescued at about 4 days old when she was found abandoned on a busy West Bank city street, and reared with loving care by our fabulous vet, Dr. Rakan. I don't know about you, but I think she looks pretty pleased that she's now protected from diseases that could so easily end her life. Just watch out for the double-barreled. Wow, pretty impressive. Well done, Kay. Your donkeys are absolutely reliant on you to provide vital protection for them. So please just do it. Now I'm checking the webcams and it looks like you're all asleep, so I'd better finish. But thanks very much for listening and I'm happy to take some questions.